Hello, I'm Erkin here from MedPorium, and today we will start part 3 of the skeletal system. The topics that we will discuss in this video include bone development and bone formation, as well as bone elongation. Bone development. Bone development occurs around the 6th week of embryonic development, so 6 weeks after fertilization. Bone development is initiated by mesenchymal stem cells, which aggregate into osteoblasts. Now, you may be wondering, what are mesenchymal stem cells? Well, these are stem cells that have yet to differentiate into their own specific niche or their own group. For bone development, these mesenchymal stem cells will eventually aggregate and become osteoblasts. Now, if you recall from our previous lecture, osteoblasts are the bone cells that are responsible for bone growth, and they do this by bone deposition. Bone formation can go one of two ways inside the human body. The first way is through intramembranous ossification, and let's put that in yellow here. The first way is intramembranous ossification, and the second way is endochondral ossification. Now let's take a look here at intramembranous ossification. Intramembranous ossification is responsible for flat bone formation in the human bodies. So it is responsible for flat bone formation. Now, before we take a look at the steps of intramembranous ossification, we have to familiarize ourselves with something called ossification centers. Ossification centers. Now, all this is just a bundle of osteoblasts that will eventually secrete osteoid tissue to form bone. So, over here, let's zoom in on this diagram. We have our very first step of intramembranous ossification, and that's ossification centers appear in the fibrous connective tissue membrane. So over here in purple, let me highlight here, this is just collagen fibers, okay? And over here, let's put that in orange, we have our mesenchymal stem cells that we discussed about earlier. Here in orange, and over here, let's put that in pink, we just have our bundle of osteoblasts. Now the second step is osteoid tissue is secreted within the fibrous membrane and calcifies. So over here, our osteoblasts will secrete osteoid tissue, okay, and then after a while, after a few days, this osteoid tissue will calcify, and that's what makes our bones hard, the calcification that's occurring. Step 3, woven bone and the periosteum forms. So these mesenchymal stem cells will condense and form that protective membrane we know as the periosteum. And over here, this woven bone will calcify and eventually turn into step 4, which is lamellar bone replaces woven bone just deep to the periosteum. And also, red bone marrow appears. So this bone eventually hardens again and again and again, and it calcifies, and it keeps calcifying until it has this final product here in step 4. It has this fibrous periosteum, and these osteoblasts will secrete this osteoid tissue, and after a few days it'll calcify into this plate of compact bone here. Now the second way bone forms in the human body is through a process called endochondral ossification. Now endochondral ossification is responsible for long bone formation. They're responsible for making the long bones in our body. And it's very similar to intramembranous ossification in that it has ossification centers. They both start off with ossification centers. Now, if we take a look at our second model here, if we zoom in on it, over here, step 1, we have an early cartilage model. So this newborn here already has a pre-made hyaline cartilage, and as he grows older, in step 2, the formation of the primary ossification center and the bony collar and the periosteum will develop. So we have this primary ossification center here with chondrocytes instead of osteoblasts. So these enlarging chondrocytes, and chondrocytes, all it is just cells of the cartilage. These enlarging chondrocytes will form into this primary ossification center. Step 3 is vascular invasion with the formation of a primary marrow cavity. So this vascular invasion, this blood vessel is invading this cavity that we have here to help provide nutrients for growth. And the main difference between the major difference between intramembranous and endochondral ossification is that endochondral ossification has 2 ossification centers. And in step 4 here, we have the bone at birth, so with an enlarged primary marrow cavity and an appearance of a secondary marrow cavity in one epiphysis. So here we have 2 epiphyses right here, and we have the formation of the secondary ossification center here. We can see the diaphysis here in green that I'm highlighting, and our 2 epiphyses. The 5th step is the bone of the child with an epiphyseal plate at the distal end. So here we have this epiphyseal plate, and this is how bone elongation occurs. We will discuss this here in a minute. The stacking of these chondrocytes will push away this epiphyseal plate for growth. And here we have the metaphysis. We should discuss that. The metaphysis, all it is just this little layer that separates this diaphysis from the epiphyseal plate. And our last part, the last step of endochondral ossification, is our final product, which is an adult bone with a single marrow cavity. Here in green, I've highlighted a single marrow cavity and a closed epiphyseal plate. So this epiphyseal plate closes and becomes an epiphyseal line. This concludes our growth after puberty. Now that we have learned how bone forms and bone develops, let's look at how our long bones elongate and give us height. Now, bone elongation occurs at the epiphyseal plate. There are 4 zones of growth. There's the zone of resting cartilage, which is at the very top. We have the zone of proliferating cartilage, the zone of hypertrophic cartilage, and then calcified cartilage at the very bottom. Let's dive deeper into each specific layer of growth and see its properties and see what's going on inside. But before we do that, let's get started let's remind ourselves what a chondrocyte is. And a chondrocyte is a cell that is found in cartilage. These are cartilaginous cells. So back over here to the layers. Layer number 1, we have our resting cartilage. Now there's not a lot of things going on here in this first layer. It's just a bunch of these chondrocytes that are here and they're resting. Our second layer, let's put that here in dark green. Our second layer here is called our proliferating cartilage. Now this is where basically most of the growth occurs. If we look over here, we see these chondrocytes, I'm circling here in green, are stacked up to each other, and they are undergoing rapid mitosis, and they are stacking up on top of each other like a stack of coins. And this stacking is what pushes away the epiphyses from the diaphysis. This is how we grow, the stacking of these coins, or the stacking of the chondrocytes for that matter. So once again, these chondrocytes over here will eventually split off. They will undergo mitosis, and then they will become two different chondrocytes, and they will stack up onto each other, and this will repeat itself, and they will stack up. These chondrocytes will stack. Now our third zone over here, let's put that in blue. Our third zone is called our hypertrophic cartilage zone. So hypertrophic cartilage. Now this zone contains chondrocytes that are matured and that are old. They will mature, they are old, and they will become old, and this will enlarge. So these in this hypertrophic cartilage zone, or layer number 3, this little tiny chondrocyte will mature and enlarge and become our final product that we have here. This also accounts for the pushing away of the epiphysis and the diaphysis. It's just an increase in size. Now our very last layer is called the calcified layer. This is calcified cartilage over here. So we have calcified cartilage, and calcified cartilage, let's write that down. And these contain dead chondrocytes. So here, these are just dead chondrocytes, and as we go through puberty, these dead chondrocytes will calcify and become hard bone matrix, which solidifies the growth. So here we just looked at the 4 layers of growth inside of the epiphyseal plate. This is how we grow, and this process will go throughout our puberty, and towards the end of puberty, this epiphyseal plate will calcify and turn into bone, and then the epiphyseal plate will turn into an epiphyseal line. And that concludes part 3 of the skeletal system. The topics that we discussed in this video included bone development, bone formation, and bone elongation. Now, as always, remember, a Pomodoro a day will make you a doctor someday.